microbiology doesn't exist separate from psychology and sociology, because we know that when we're stressed out, when we're susceptible to microbes, so our social climate affects, microbial balance, and certainly we'll talk about that later today. So I think functional medicine allows those different disciplines to intersect, and obviously we use that clinically as a tool. So again, honoring Dr. Bland's contribution to the broad discipline of health sciences, not simply for adding to existing science, but more so for adding a new branch on the tree of science. Obviously, many people have contributed to this. I'll show you in a moment the functional medicine matrix, which is certainly our clinical application of functional medicine, but also represents the work of many, many people, many focus groups, many conversations, thousands of emails, and different conversations in that regard. So again, with the appreciation that I think Dr. Bland served as the nucleus for this idea, also appreciating the contribution that other people made to it, I still want to go back to honoring Dr. Bland, because I think every idea and every movement needs a leader. It has to have some nucleus around which the other components can form, kind of a scaffolding. And I talk about that in a few more slides, but I'll just read what I wrote here. Every great idea and movement needs a person to guide and nurture it, to serve as the nucleus around which others can build structure and add conceptual and intellectual scaffolding, which, while the result may be a group effort, was certainly initiated by one mind. And as many of you know, Dr. Bland himself comes from a pretty rich heritage of having worked with Dr. Pauling, and as most of you know, Dr. Pauling was who originated the idea of molecular medicine with his discovery of the amino acid substitution in sickle cell anemia. So that's really where our heritage began, also obviously with Roger J. Williams, obviously before that, Meshnikov, and many others. So one of the ways that we apply functional medicine model, and whether we use that as a specific tool or whether we use it just as a conceptual background, what it allows us to do is form a scheme of behavior. And as many of you know, Nietzsche is my favorite philosopher, so I always have to plug his work. So one of my favorite quotes from Nietzsche is, in order for a particular species to maintain itself and increase its power, and the power in this context just could mean clinical effectiveness, for example, its conception of reality must comprehend enough of the calculable and constant for it to base a scheme of behavior on it. And I think that's what we have with the functional medicine matrix and the functional medicine application. It gives us a scheme of behavior, it gives us a way of understanding how things work together, so we can use that then as an intellectual checklist and make sure that we've covered all of the most important pieces. Now, even in this model, we could probably identify things that aren't included, that should be included, but I think for this model to be clinically applicable, it has to be functional and therefore must be somewhat limited so that we're not overwhelmed with 10,000 data points in a 10-minute visit. So this model certainly covers the biggest bases. And again, I think that provides us a clinical framework and a scheme that we can move forward with when we're working with patients, but also, as I said, for understanding even how basic sciences can interrelate with each other. Again, going back to the example of microbiology, which will be one of my themes throughout my first presentation, and certainly in the last presentation of the day. You're going to see how microbes really affect inflammatory balance, but the question then becomes, well, what affects microbial balance? If microbial balance affects immune balance, what was before that? Diet, sociology, culture. So Dr. Bland has been my professor and mentor for the last about 20 years. When I first started listening to his audio tapes from the library, those tapes were nutritional biochemistry, and that was a series of seminars and talks that Dr. Bland had put together many, many years ago, back in the 80s, I believe, if not 70s. And back in the day, we just recorded the lectures, and of course I dubbed them, so I have my own library. And so in that sense, even before we met personally, Dr. Bland was kind of my intellectual mentor with regard to nutrition and what is now functional medicine. Here I am, caught guilty drinking a Coke when I was a kid. I left my other siblings out, but I didn't mind sacrificing my brother. I'd like to say that was the last soft drink I ever had, but it wasn't, because obviously we had to mature in our understanding of what's healthy and what's not. I'm sure you all remember the ads from back in the 70s and 80s, right? Coke adds life. Right? None of us would say that now. But back in the day, that's the model that we grew up with. That certain foods were consistent with a healthy life. Obviously, again, none of us would agree with that. Part of the reason I put this slide in here is because even though I'm caught guilty with a Coke in my hand, or a soft drink of some sort, I actually started studying nutrition even when I was very, very young as a kid. Back in the 70s, my dad was one of the so-called health nuts, which meant he exercised and tried to eat a healthy diet. That made him a health nut back in the 70s. But I grew up being exposed to his ideas and cod liver oil, which we had to have for breakfast when I was with them, and vitamins. But it didn't serve simply as a dietary pattern necessarily for me, because here I am, guilty. But what it served for me was to start planting seeds of questions. And so I remember even as a child, my dad would say, well, we have to eat healthy, or you can't drink water with your meals, or you have to take cod liver oil. And even though, of course, we didn't understand things back then to the level that we do now, it just started seeding these questions in my mind. Like, why do some people eat the way they do? What's the benefit of this pattern versus that? Why are some people concerned about that and other people are indifferent to that? So even as a young man, young boy, I was aware of nutrition. I started studying nutrition when I was a teenager, and later went on to kind of really enjoy science, molecular biology, and move forward through different programs. Obviously starting with chiropractic because I was interested in exercise and manual medicine and nutrition, then going to naturopathic medical school to further my education in nutrition and botanical medicines, and then later, after a couple of years of clinical practice, going to osteopathic medical school, and I loved it then and I still love it. This is one of the tapes I used to listen to, and I can actually quote this, I can actually quote Jeff Bland back to himself. I've listened to this tape so many times. But again, as you can tell from this tape, this was actually, the date's not on this one, this was Advancement in Clinical Nutrition 1994. And a couple of times I've told Jeff, I said, your ideas back in 1994 still haven't been incorporated into medical schools, because one of the things he said in this presentation, he said, one day, biochemistry is not going to simply be a flaming hoop that medical students have to jump through, it's going to be a clinically relevant course. And we're way past that time. It should have happened. And I don't know that it's happened yet. And I would say it probably hasn't. Certainly not to the level that we're going to discuss today. So, again, honoring him for being such a pioneer. This was back in 1994 again, so about 20 years ago. And what he says back 20 years ago is still relevant today. It's still accurate today. And it's still cutting edge compared to, I would say, the majority of healthcare. So again, recognizing Dr. Bland, not simply for adding to an existing tree or branch, but adding an entirely new branch onto the tree of science. So, we have an award for Dr. Bland, which I'll be happy to co-deliver with Deanna Minich in just a moment. So what this award means for me, and why Deanna and I selected this, at least for me, what it represents is force, because all of this takes massive effort, not just a little bit of effort, but a lot of hours of work until 3 o'clock in the morning. And I think this also represents grace, nature, flow, also leadership, but also teamwork. You can see that one whale is slightly ahead of the others, and he's pushing that force current ahead of himself even still, right? So that's why we selected this trophy. People who contributed to this, myself, Deanna Minich, several of our students, Andrea, Jerry, Paulette, Monica, Terry, Joseph, Kathy, Francis, Sandra, Paulette, Ryan, Karen, George, Eric, Georgia, Karen, Angelique, and Jennifer. So I think at this time we'll deliver that award to Dr. Bland. So this is on behalf of your students, all of us who are your students, and even your students' progeny, all of those who benefit from your work and the teamwork of the Functional Medicine Legacy. On behalf of the International College of Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine, thank you for your contribution to science, basic science, as well as clinical science.
most authentic and emotional thank you for the acknowledgement of what has been a really remarkable and unexpected path for me over the last 35 years. And to have people like you who are doing more than I would have ever dreamed were possible as affiliates is the greatest compliment I could ever have. You know, I think you all know as teachers, you evaluate your role as a teacher when your students are better than you. And I've been very blessed to have students that are better than I am. So, thank you so much. Little factoid, and I'm not going to tread a little bit on the humor going from the serious. My son Kelly is 44. My oldest son, I have 3 boys. And so he texted me last night and said, "Well, Daddy, I hear you're in Portland." I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, how's it going?" And I said, "I'm having an unbelievable deja vu experience because my journey in this whole field started in Oregon. Some of you know that I went to graduate school and then up on the Hill to Oregon Health Sciences and medical school back in the yes, it was the 60s. And I did have the long, bushy woodsman red hair and the big red beard with a little eye stuck down inside this bushy mane of the bear from the North Woods. And my family, which lived at the time in Southern California, when I would come home, couldn't believe that I had been born as the Northwest woodsman. But the hotel that I'm staying at tonight was the first real hotel as a junior assistant professor when I took my first real job at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington after finishing up here in Oregon. And in 1970, I started with my first research student, Phil Madden, who later went on to become the head of internal medicine at Johns Hopkins many years later. But Phil came to me and said, "I want to do some research in vitamin E." And I knew nothing really about vitamin E, other than Alice and I shared a similar lineage in our family, that my mother, in this case, was the health devotee, and we were raised on Adele Davis, and we never had white bread or desserts or soft drinks or sugar. And you know, my mom and dad were in constant battle because my dad was kind of a Midwest traditionalist about nutrition, but my mother would never let us to be so exposed to my father's poor ways in terms of nutrition selection. So we would always go, and I'm also, interestingly enough, connected to Deanna Minnick in this way, because we, as kids, would be sent to school with, we couldn't eat the cafeteria lunches, obviously, at our elementary schools. We had to go with the bag lunches of, the cut vegetables and all these various whole grain things. And we were, both she and I have commented, we were expunged by our fellow students, thinking, what were we being subjected to cruel, unusual punishment? Didn't our mothers know how to really give us good lunches? And so we felt like we were discriminated against. But, it built a tough spirit over the years, and you have to be the outlier. So when I arrived here after completing my work in Oregon, and then went up to Puget Sound and had Mr. Madden become my first research student, we were very lucky that our research actually was very successful. We got a lot of notoriety. We were the first group to actually discover the co-molecular mechanism of the action of vitamin E in protecting membranes against oxidative injury. We published these papers, and suddenly people were calling me nutritionist, which I always wondered who they were talking about. And then I recognized they were talking about me because I was working on something that had to do with nutrition. I was a nutritionist. And at first I thought it was very strange. Then later I really wore this with great pride. I thought, wow, this is pretty neat. I got a degree in accreditation and never even went to school for it. This is pretty neat. And so my first opportunity then to come back and speak to doctors about this work as kind of this nutrition guy, this nutritional biochemist, was 1973, in which the hotel that I stayed was the hotel I stayed in last night. And so this was like an unbelievable Back to the Future 360 for me. And I reminded myself that yes, it's been, so that was 73, so that was 40 years ago, right, by my math. That everything changes in 40 years and nothing changes. So that's the holography of life, right? And there's a really powerful metaphor about that, because we live every moment in every other moment of our life. And sometimes it's hard to recognize that, including our futures, I believe. So it's not just our present and our past, it's also our future, because we're creating our future in the present, the trajectory of all of our lives. What is the lesson plan? What's the journey that we're on? How does that kind of direct us, in my case, to do 360 over 40 years, end up in the same hotel, possibly even in the same room, except with a little bit more knowledge and a whole lot more joy, because I kind of understand the journey a little bit better now, 40 years than I did when I was at my first medical meeting, was trying to go over my slides and dropped on the ground, I recall, and this is back in the day with slide projectors and carousel, projectors, and I was so nervous I dropped my slides and then tried to put them back in order and didn't put them in the right order and somewhere upside down, and I winged it, so nothing has changed. It's all kind of like the same circumstances, a little more high-tech now. So this is an incredible privilege to share this moment with you and to be honored, and I take it with very, very deep umbrage because it is, as Alan said, a collection of extraordinarily dedicated individuals that have allowed us to arrive at this place where we can start to actually have some voice in, and I don't want to be too exaggerated, but we're starting to have a voice in this concept of functional medicine at a larger theater of impact in policy making and decision making. There are functional medicine programs that are now being started at the VA with returning vets back who are coming back with all sorts of functional injuries, both emotional and physical. And we're starting to have an impact at various medical schools. I think there are 17 medical schools that have use of the textbook of functional medicine. And we're starting to have impact on large clinics. There are now discussions about collaborative projects with major, I probably shouldn't disclose, but let's say some of the most visible, iconic names in medical clinics in the United States want to have functional medicine programs. So it's starting to get some traction. And it's a consequence of the tireless work and the dedication to excellence that all of you and people like Alex have brought, that we even have that chance to have that dialogue. So I'd like to take this moment and turn the table around just for a moment because, as I said, every good teacher really honors and celebrates their students. And Deanna, maybe you can step up here and we can take a moment to acknowledge a special person.
Yes, definitely. So Dr. Glenn and I would like to take this time to acknowledge Dr. Vasquez with an achievement award. And before I go into reading his long list of achievements, which many of you are probably already familiar with and have even been a part of, I'd like to just say that it's been a pleasure working with Alex this year. I had the opportunity to work with him as part of the faculty for the University of Western States co-teaching, so that was a great experience. And then watching him almost single-handedly go through this process of creating this conference, this international venue of information and inspiration. So he is quite remarkable. It's not common that you see a tri-degree person handling not just creating a whole new degree, but also a conference, writing books, and really forging ground. So just to, for those of you who aren't as familiar with Dr. Vasquez's background, he served as the founding program director for the Master of Science degree program in Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine at the University of Western States. He's brought a wealth of clinical experience, scientific knowledge, administrative skills, interprofessional contacts, and partnerships to the university. I think that's the beauty of his background, that he can meld the science so beautifully together with his clinical experience. He is the world's only clinician, researcher, and professor author to have achieved 3 doctorate degrees in 3 different healthcare professions, and is the author of 15 books, and I think you even have 4 books coming out next year, right? So let's make that almost 19. And more than 100 scientific articles. He's earned the respect of students, physicians, and other health science professionals worldwide. He also, I would like to make mention that he recently founded not just having a master's program and this conference, but also a journal, the International Journal of Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine, which is a platform for students, faculty, and other clinicians and researchers to rapidly and broadly publish their works at no cost to themselves or their institutions. What I really like about Dr. Vasquez is that he sees the need, what's not working in different systems, and goes beyond and recreates them. He was an honor student at the University of Western States and also at the University of North Texas Health Science Center. He completed a pre-doctoral research fellowship sponsored by the National Institute of Health. He is preeminent in his knowledge of basic and clinical sciences. And I'll end by saying that not only is Dr. Vasquez an incredibly brilliant scientific researcher and very skilled clinician, but he's very well-rounded. He is not just left brain, he's also right brain. And as he mentioned with his quotes, he has a lot of love for the fields of philosophy, psychology, as well as politics and organizational leadership. So it's not very often that we find such a well-rounded individual who has contributed so much to science and especially functional medicine. So with that, Dr. Blanton, I would like to present Dr. Vasquez with an award.
So as you probably all know, Dr. Minnick is Vice President of Education for our new organization called the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute, and I'll say a few more words about it later. And we both were very, very privileged to have this opportunity in a formal way to acknowledge Dr. Vasquez, who has been a friend and colleague for, as he said, more than 20 years of mine personally, a person that I've admired and watched his career growth. And so this is an achievement award, Alex, at the end, and the TLMI would like to provide you. And it says the Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute honors Alex Vasquez for his significant contribution to the global evolution of healthcare through his leadership in medical education and clinical innovation over the past 20 years. His commitment to clinical excellence and systems-based medicine served as standards for medicine in the 21st century. Awarded September 25th, 2013, we're very proud to honor you.
Certainly appreciate that, Jeff and Deanna. And this, by the way, was totally spontaneous. I just found out this was going to happen like 5 minutes before we came on the stage, practically. So I appreciate that. It's probably not much more.
Well, you know me, there's always something to be said. So let me fill a couple of minutes here. I thought maybe what I could do with remaining time is to talk about the evolution of an idea to clinical practice, which is this functional medicine model. And just for those of you that are unfamiliar with its origin or what it really means, I'd like to just spend maybe 15 minutes kind of giving you a quick compressed review of how this all came about. And I think someone said it just, actually David said it to me just before we came up on the stage, and he said, it's not very often that you can take a term and reframe it to have a whole totally different meaning when everybody thinks they already know the term. So in 1989, my wife, Susan, my dearly beloved partner, who had been the vice president of the organization that I've been involved with at HealthCom, which was our company, said to me, Jeff, you've traveled about 5 million miles around the world as kind of this ambassador for nutritional biochemistry and clinical nutrition and so forth. And you probably traveled a lot, maybe more than you needed to, and maybe we could form an institute and people could come here to learn. Would that be an interesting idea? And I said, well, we really don't need another institute. I mean, there's like all these organizations, and it's a proliferation of organizations. And he said, but no, the way you think about this, I'm telling you, is a little different than all these other organizations. Not that these organizations are bad or wrong or doing the wrong thing, but maybe you could codify these concepts. And I said, well, before I would even consider that, I think we should ask, what is the novelty of our idea? What is the uniqueness? How does it differentiate itself? So she came up with the idea, then let's sponsor, and this was 1989 and 90, meetings where we'll bring thought leaders in. We'll pay for them to come in. And she chose Victoria, British Columbia, a nice little spot. And we'll spend 3 days with a whiteboard and just talk about the what is. What would it be the best of all worlds if we could create a healthcare paradigm shift that would add value and reduce suffering and improve outcome? And so I've had the privilege of all these miles of travel, meeting all these very remarkable thinkers from different disciplines. So I kind of handpicked about 20 colleagues that represent all sorts of different disciplines. It really didn't necessarily know one another. And we threw them together in Victoria with a whiteboard with this broad objective. Let's just talk, open-ended. All ideas are open for discussion about what the what-ifs of what healthcare could look like if it was idealized. And it turned out to be an extraordinary and robust and intellectually stimulating 3 days. I mean, it was just amazing, the ideas that percolated. And out of that, I recall on the second day of this discussion and thinking about this, and I need to kind of give some precedent saying, or some precedent saying that I had in 81 and 2 taken a sabbatical at the Pauling Institute, where I was the head of nutritional research for Linus Pauling for a couple of years down in Palo Alto at Stanford. So I had already been infected with this idea that Alex had been talking about as it relates to orthomolecular medicine, about molecular medicine, and of course my training coming up through clinical biochemistry, I was already kind of, as Esther said, I was prepared for the chance of discovery, right? So when we had this discussion in Victoria, I then recall the second day, waking up, actually in the middle of this was almost like Kekulite with the monkeys swirling in his mind. I woke up in the middle of the night and I said, I think this is all about function that we're talking about. Because function goes into dysfunction, which precedes pathophysiology. So maybe we should back this whole model up because function is a unifying theme, I believe, that all disciplines are interested in at some level, no matter if it's subspecialties or exercise physiology or psychology or whatever it might be, whatever the discipline. It seemed like function was an operative term. But the problem was that a function, as you know, in medicine really had two kind of already preceded meanings. One was psychosomatic illness, functional illness, which really is another way of saying that person has a problem in their mind. It's a psychosomatic illness. And the other was in geriatric medicine, function meant orthopedic problems or gait disturbances or inability to have activities of daily living. So it had already these kind of undercurrents of precedent of the term functional medicine that would be different in the way that I was defining it. But when I went to